What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Whatcast. Mike, how you doing over there? The world's going crazy, but how are you in your neck of the woods?
I'm pretending to be an ostrich, just putting my head in the ground. So
yeah,
while the world burns around me, literally, I can smell Canada burning from my house, which is so awesome.
Really?
It's not at all. Yeah, but yeah, I'm just trying to ignore the impending apocalypse, I guess, as best as I can anyway.
Yeah. Now would be a great time, guys, to join our Patreon and get a backlog of over 400 and something episodes to listen to while the stars fall from the sky.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just hunker down in your basement or bunker or hole in the backyard and just throw on the Whatcast and let our voices lull you into the apocalypse.
Yeah, even if you hate us, just spend like the $5 so you can smite us while you die.
Especially if you hate us, you should spend the $5. Specifically, just like if you're a glutton for punishment and you're really looking for a way to fuck yourself over, join the print club. You know, give us all those dollars and then you can get new things to add to your dartboard every month when Mateo sends you a new print.
Yeah, something to burn.
Look at it that way. Yeah.
That's a good point. It's good if you hate us or love us. You can put our stickers like on the back of cop cars or on garbage cans.
It's for everybody. Our Patreon is for everyone, whether you love us or you hate us or you don't even know who we are. For those of you out there that aren't listening and have never listened, I hope that you received this psychic message to join our Patreon. Like maybe you're just surfing around on Patreon someday and all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to type in random words and it just happens to fall on the Whatcast. And there we are. Put your information in, get yourself a backlog of stuff ad free and maybe some stickers and prints and whatnots.
Yeah.
And you there listening, if you know this, rewind this whole thing and play it for a stranger.
Ooh, maybe not right now. Maybe not right now.
Yeah, maybe listen to the entire episode first, then go back, and when you're re-listening a second time, pull a stranger in and have them listen to that whole thing about Patreon and then be like, huh? And just kind of like look suggestively at them.
Yeah.
Until they either get uncomfortable or join the Patreon. Join us.
And there's like a free membership area too. You can join that. Sometimes I throw some of the bonus episodes on there. There's where the link for when we do live episodes, which next week's episode will be a live episode, but that's open to everybody. So you can go over there and join up for free and then get notified when we do the hangouts, and you can join us while we stutter and be stoned.
Yeah, we do that. We also have a Discord, and it's fun. They do a lot of talking and whatnots there. It's pretty active, but we don't allow haters in there though. So if you hate us, you're probably gonna get blocked by the mod of power.
Yeah, there is Delago the Discord mod of power, and we're serious with the power. He will know before he'll know while you're typing "I hate you guys," and then just block you.
And not only block you, but he'll also make it so your keyboard shocks you. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. So
yeah, that's hence the power name. That's why.
Yeah. He's the mod of power. But before we start the show, I want to say in advance, just in case, there is a cricket that escaped in my office, and he has been very noisy. And I just want to throw that out there in advance, in case he decides to start singing love songs in the middle of this recording. He was really loud like 10 minutes before I started the call with Mateo, and he was polite enough to shut the fuck up once the call connected. So I'm hoping that he will stay polite and either, shut up or maybe get eaten by a spider. Just so long as he stays quiet, I don't really care. But I just wanted to put that out there because I know in the past we have had comments about crickets showing up, and no, it's not a live audience falling asleep. It's actual crickets. I've got a lot of reptiles, so occasionally a cricket will escape, and these things happen.
We let them be free.
Yeah, if they're out, I'm not going to go chasing them around. It's not like I'm going to magically develop a cricket colony in here. Just one lone cricket singing love songs in the middle of the night is, it's only going to last like a month or so, and then I'll be fine. So let him do his thing.
Speaking of crickets, what did we talk? That has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight, but what are we talking about?
Absolutely nothing to do with it. Well, I wanted to talk about crickets tonight, Mateo. So nice segue. No, I got, I'm going to talk about Bigfoot, but I'm not. This is another episode of Bigfoot Isn't Bigfoot, guys. That's what this boils down to. Last time we did Bigfoot Isn't Bigfoot, it was regarding Bigfoot potentially being poltergeist or poltergeist being Bigfoot. Today, I would like to discuss with you guys reasons on why Bigfoot is a fairy.
Ooh, I like it.
So, Mateo, when you hear the word fairy, what do you think?
I think of maybe not Tinkerbell, but gosh, maybe Willow, like the brownies.
Oh yeah, I love the brownies. They're the best.
Yeah, so maybe they don't have to have wings, but smaller people of the forest. I never link them to being spirits of the forest. I'm sure that's what they are, but I've heard the term like the fae folk at an early age. So to me, they're very much like a different species. They're something that just lives in some woods.
So Bigfoot, right? Bigfoot prances around as a little person and with potentially wings and gets drunk off a thimbleful of beer.
Bigfoot? I don't know about that.
Yeah, come on. He's tiny. That's the one thing we all know about Bigfoot. Well, the thing with fairies, the modern interpretation of fairies is something that was established in the 18th century. So it's not the traditional fairy in myth and legend. Like the fairy, the little tiny woman in a dress with the gossamer wings floating around flowers and shit. That's relatively modern. The thing about fairies is that the only commonality that there really is that they're some sort of earth spirit. So there's through different cultures, and even within the same cultures, there's different types of beings that are considered to be fairies. And this could be something like you said, the brownies, some short little diminutive woodland being, or goblins, kobolds, but even trolls and giants are considered to be fae folk. The other thing about fairies, though, is that they are known to be mimics, both in terms of their ability to change their voices, as well as take on different appearances and even change their sizes. But even with that in mind, that's not something that you would typically think of when it comes to Bigfoot. But there's a lot of weird parallels between Bigfoot, Bigfoot sightings, things attributed to Bigfoot, and things that were often attributed to fairies. So I want to start out with a story that was reported, and some of this actually ties into missing 411 stuff, which I've said in the past is likely tied into some fairy lore stuff, but also alien abduction stuff. It all kind of overlaps. But this particular story came from the newspaper out of Salem, Oregon, called the Weekly Oregon Statesman. And this was reported on June 9th in 1857. So immediately with the 1800s, I'm always skeptical of things that are printed in newspapers in the 1800s, especially the second half of the 1800s. It just seems there's a lot of tall tales. But just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to share this particular story. So the story was reporting on a boy who he was the ward of a farmer, and they had been searching for livestock that got loose and were lost in the forest. So as they're looking for the livestock in the forest, it ends up getting late. They came prepared to spend the night just in case. So they set up camp, go to sleep. The boy gets woken up in the middle of the night by a loud screaming. And when he wakes up and looks to see what it is, he sees what he describes as a hairy man that's 12 to 15 feet tall. And it had glowing eyes that he described to look like liquid balls of fire. Which, if we could talk about that just for a second, the liquid balls of fire thing, that's something that we've seen attributed to several different beings, namely Mothman, obviously, but several other something man type beings have also been reported with those red eyes, the glowing red eyes. What was the one in Mexico? Eagle Man?
Yeah.
And then there was the Black Bird of Chernobyl. I can't even think of there's so many, well, all variants of the Mothman, and we talked about that in the Lake Michigan Mothman, where there was all the different forms that it took, but all the forms shared the same dark skin and glowing red eyes. But there's a thing in fairy lore with glowing balls of light. So I wonder if it's part of like a fey illusion, so to speak.
Right.
But anyway, I'm going off on Mothman. This is not about Mothman being a fairy, although Mothman could potentially be a fairy, guys. I'm not going to rule it out. But the boy, once he sees this thing, he's paralyzed, and this thing grabbed him and pulled him away. And he dragged him into the woods where there was a trap door with a ladder that was leading down into a subterranean lair. And he said once he got down there, this area was illuminated with phosphorescent light. And he said the cave under the ground seemed to arch slightly at the ceiling. And the ceiling itself looked like it was made up of seashells that were different shapes and colors. Now, the seashell thing will be relevant later, but I do want to bring that up now. He said once he was in the cave, from deeper down the tunnel, he started hearing this weird, unearthly music. The creature that brought him in left him in this tunnel, or in this cavern, and went down the tunnel. And then he came back, and he was with the boy described him as a young, delicate female of almost miraculous grace and beauty. And she put this embossed card into the boy's hands. And when he looked at it, on the card was written, "Boy, depart hence forthwith, or remain and be devoured."
Whoa.
So the boy freaks out, and he waits to find like the opportune time. And once he's able to distract this creature, he runs up the ladder and he pulls out his knife, and using his knife, he popped the door open and escaped, and then reported everything afterwards. But this has several parallels with fairy lore. For one, there is the idea that there is an underground passage that'll lead to the fairyland, and the fairy realm, or the fairyland, fairy world, whatever you want to call it. It seems to be something that is accessible through cracks in the ground and caves and underground tunnels, but it's not what you would picture as like your typical underground lair. Once you get there, you'd go through the tunnel system, the caves, and you'd come out into this lush green area. with all these trees and fairy folk and whatnot. Magical place. But in addition to that, so the boy was pulled underground in this thing. He also reported a faint glow, which is also something that's typically reported in the tunnels leading to fairyland. He described music, unearthly music like he had never heard before, and was approached by a small, beautiful woman, which, could be construed as a fairy. But the other thing is there's an actual story. It's an old Scottish legend where a boy is taken into the fairy realm through this hole or through this door in the forest that goes underground. And the father goes to rescue his son, and he does so by using his knife to prop open this door and pull his son out. So there's kind of a commonality there. Now, you could say that maybe the writer of this original story, the original article in the newspaper, maybe was a folklore enthusiast and had heard that legend and concocted this story. But it's interesting that in the story, it was a 12 to 15 foot tall hairy person and not some tricky fairies.
Right. Even the place where he was taken, even this lair sounds like a fairy home, like a fairy cave.
Yeah. It's got the music, the glow. And there's also a precedent in fairy lore of humans that show up being warned to go away before they're kept forever.
That's interesting to give the option, though. That's weird.
Yeah. It's like I don't know. It's kind of weird, but I guess that kind of goes along with the trickster, the whole modus operandi of a trickster. They give you choices and see if you can tie your own rope, basically. But fairies throughout time. So what we think of fairies now, like we'll take the leprechaun, for instance. The leprechaun we all think of as this short little guy with a ginger beard wearing all green and hoarding gold. But you go far back into the Celtic myths, and they were divine beings. They weren't just a little greedy man. There was a lot more to them, and it's interesting how over time things change. Like ancient gods become demons, and in this way, a lot of this stuff happens where fairies, well, those who still believe in the fairy faith and in parts of especially Northern Europe, that there's still a pretty strong belief in them. But I don't think it's a belief, again, in the little tiny diminutive people. It's more a spiritual thing, like a earth spirits. But there's some that look at them and like if you take the Ancient Aliens route, fairies are aliens that are just reported by our ancestors as being fairies. But there's others that look at fairies as being potentially demons or fallen angels or something else, maybe Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, it just outlines because it was a 12 to 15 foot tall hairy man that it was clearly a what we would call a Bigfoot, but it's following fairy lore, which happens. There's quite a few cases where that happens, but there's so many cases in legend where there's a visitor to fairyland who, like I said, gets urged by another individual within fairyland, whether it be what they perceive to be some sort of fey creature or person. In some cases, it's what they perceive to be a captive soul, someone who's been trapped, and usually it'll be a friend or a relative warning them to get out of there or they get trapped forever.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of further that, the one place that we don't typically think of fairies showing up is in a lot of Native American lore. But there's a lot of lore and sightings among, and I know it's a common thing for people to say, well, the natives reported seeing Bigfoot before the white man came. And yeah, we all know it's all been said before. But the weird thing is that there's a lot of legends that they have of these smaller hairy men that match a lot of other Fey legends and that come out of Europe. And it really, even in Europe, there's a lot of cases where, or a lot of traditional, I'm using quotey fingers. You guys can't see my quotey fingers, but traditional descriptions of fairies where they're hairy. A lot of them are on the smaller side, though, which would match up with like the Orang Pendek or the stories of Littlefoot. Or we do often hear stories of a large Bigfoot with a smaller Bigfoot, that looking at it from a human perspective, we're like, oh, well, that's clearly a Bigfoot parent and a baby, but maybe it's just this same being, or well, the same type of being, just inhabiting two different sizes.
Right. Yeah. That's, I mean, completely understandable.
Yeah. But there's this, so I don't want to say well-known, because, I mean, not too many people know about fairy lore from the 17th century, but in 1645, there's a person named Anne Jeffreys, who is, she's basically known because she was an alleged fairy abductee. And she says the beings that abducted her were small and hairy, and they were covered in dark fur. And then we remember the fighting Venezuelan critters.
Hell yeah, I do.
They were all, they kind of looked like mini Bigfoot, but they had glowing eyes.
Holy shit, yeah, they did.
Yeah. And then in the classic dwarves, which were known in Brittany as Nanes, they were covered in black hair all over their body and had sparkling black eyes. And then we can go over to Persian legends, and there's a thing called the Div, and that has shaggy hair, great fangs, and big ugly paws. But these are all beings that they're given different names in the different places, but they're all similar. They're all considered to be like earth spirits, basically. But they are represented by these squat, fuzzy bodies. It's weird. So even you mentioned the brownies from Willow. There is a regional brownie variant that display, they're looked at as being more ape-like in appearance. They're back in the old texts reporting on fairy lore, they were actually referred to as looking simian.
Huh.
So simian typically means monkey-like or primate-like. But there's a tradition in German that was believed that they referred to fairies as underground people. And it was in their folklore, if a fairy broke a pact, it was doomed to wander the earth in the shape of an animal. And it would typically take the shape of either toads, wolves, beetles, or apes.
Huh.
Which is interesting because apes aren't native to Germany.
Right.
But the other things are. So that's kind of interesting.
Wow, that touches on that. Does it belong there?
Yeah, it just furthers the idea that they are shapeshifters and can change shape whenever they need to.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned earlier the Native American tribes mentioning it, similar things, but the Tlingits, the Tlingit tribe has a thing called the Kushtaka, and that is so close to a Bigfoot that a lot of researchers and scholars kind of categorize them in the same place as a Bigfoot.
Oh.
And then the Susquehannock of southern Pennsylvania had stories of this race of short hair-covered creatures that they deemed to be magical spirits, but they apparently feared them so much that they adorned their war shields with their faces.
I've heard of this. Yeah, now I mean,
Yeah, so
now that you're mentioning it, dude, like if we stop and think about it, there's just as many reports of small furry people as there are big furry people. Like
yeah,
just on just as many continents and all that shit.
yep, yeah, and it's when you're looking at it in the context of fairy lore, and especially when you're looking at these old ones from Europe and Native American stories, and how there's a lot of crossover there. It's pretty. I don't know. To me, it just gives me. It kind of fills in the Bigfoot picture a little bit better for me, because to me, it just didn't make sense to say that there was a tribe or a family groups of these hominids all over the country, and no one has been able to ever find them or track them down, especially when it's in, like, I know you can say the Pacific Northwest, it's huge. There's large areas where humans have never even been, so it's possible, but it's all over the country. Like, there's sightings in the Southeast. There's sightings in New York State. There's sightings in Texas. There's sightings in the Midwest. Like, there's sightings all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it makes all that much sense to say that there's this group of massive hominids that exist in our wilderness that are, just regular flesh and blood creatures and we just don't know about them. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
It just seems like there's more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking at it through this lens kind of helps to bring that idea home. So there was a report from because there's different types of Bigfoot researchers. You've got your flesh and blood unknown creature sorts. You've got your researchers that believe it's a spiritual being. You've got your alien researchers that want to tie it in. But it's interesting when you get a flesh and blood believer who reports on something so fucking weird that it makes no sense. And just such a thing happened in 2014. So, have you ever heard of Adam Davies or John Carlson?
Adam Davies sounds very familiar.
Adam Davies he's an old school Bigfoot researcher. I guess he calls himself a cryptozoologist, but he's one of the guys that believes like a lot of these cryptoid sightings are unknown or unidentified creatures, not anything mystical and magical. But with all that in mind, he risked his reputation as a flesh and blood cryptozoologist by telling a story of this strange encounter that he had when he was with John Carlson. And what happened was they saw what appeared to be an interdimensional portal open up in the woods near this area that was a known Bigfoot hotspot where there had been a lot of Bigfoot sightings previously. Coming through this portal were a bunch of short, hairy beings that just started popping out.
Huh.
So they watched this happen, and then they turned their flashlights on and to shine on the beings as they were coming out of the portal. And when they did, everything disappeared. Like the light had banished them.
Bizarre.
Yeah. But like I said, he was a flesh and blood guy. If he's trying to prove that Bigfoot is just some unknown animal, why the hell would he make up that story? when he had never talked anything about Bigfoot being a spiritual being or anything like that.
Yeah, what would be the point and jeopardize his entire reputation?
Right.
It makes more sense that he would just report what he saw.
Yeah, exactly. But now he was looking for Bigfoot, and he reported seeing these short, hairy beings. But like I said, fairies are known shapeshifters, and there's actually some accounts of strange Bigfoot-like beings that have been reported changing their size and shape. There was a one story from 1982 in Minnesota of something that was called a troll. And this thing, when it approached the witnesses, it grew 8 inches in height and gained 50 pounds in mass as it approached them, as if it was trying to scare them off. And to me, that seems like classic trickster behavior. Rather than get into a fight or enact any violence or anything, you want someone gone, just create an illusion that's going to scare them. And there you go.
Yeah, no kidding.
There's a story from Puerto Rico in the 1970s where there was a tall, hairy creature that, again, had glowing eyes that was in her garden. And as she watched it, it perched on the fence and shrank and then transformed into a basketball-sized glowing ball of light, and then it floated away. There was a similar story that happened in Malaysia during a UFO flap of all times, but I talked previously about how these things seem to overlap. Poltergeist, Bigfoot, and UFOs all seem to overlap at the same time in a lot of cases. But during this flap, there was a witness who saw a big hairy creature that shrank down to a few inches tall.
Ooh, microfoot.
And I think I told this story of Nehemiah Cooper and his wife on the show before. It might have been a quick and the weird that I told it. I don't recall, but I'll just repeat it here just because it's so fucking bizarre. But Nehemiah Cooper and his wife were with some friends. They were returning from church when they saw this thing in the middle of the road that at first was the size of a bucket, but within a few seconds it sprung up to be 12 to 15 feet high and 6 to 7 feet wide at the shoulders.
What the absolute fuck?
Yeah. This particular location where the church is has historically had a lot of Bigfoot sightings within a few square miles in the vicinity. So this story took place in the late 1800s, but sightings of Bigfoot still occur in this area today. But it's just interesting. They see this little thing in the middle of the road, and all of a sudden it just springs up and like a fucking jack-in-the-box and telescopes out. And then we've heard about the stories and seen various alleged footage of Bigfoot hiding behind a tree that's way too skinny for Bigfoot to be hiding behind, but somehow they're peeking out from behind it. And that's also something that's seen in fairy lore, also in the creatures of the Lumberwoods.
Yes, sir. The hide behind.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I would say that would be considered some sort of shape-shifting ability or even being able to fold yourself into a pocket dimension or something.
Yeah.
But there's just so many different links. Like, so do you know, you're familiar with the Green Man, I would assume?
Yes, sir.
So for those that aren't, I'm sure everyone has seen depictions of the Green Man in some way, shape, or form, but it's typically just a face that is wreathed with leaves and vines, a big bushy beard, and usually the face is either made up of leaves or surrounded by leaves. But it corresponds with, I'm not going to get into the background of the Green Man itself, because there's debate on whether it's a Christian thing or a pagan thing, or a Christian thing to mimic pagan things. But there is nature beings or nature gods that share similarities with that. One being the Woodwose. There's also Cernunnos, Sylvestris, Pelosi, Pan, and then you could even look at like Dionysus. There's a lot of things in mythology that tie to the wild man of the woods, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that a lot of them seem to have antlers or horns, as well as goat legs. But the depiction of the Green Man seems closer to what we would think of as Bigfoot. And if you're looking at some of these tie-ins to fairy lore, there is a Green Man in Scottish folklore, and they don't look at it as, or they don't refer to it as a Green Man, but essentially it is. But it's called the Gilly Doo, and it's a solitary fairy that's covered in leaves and moss. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the term ghillie suit. It comes from this fairy, the Gilly Doo. And that's why the ghillie suits typically have that shaggy appearance that look like covered in plants and things. And it's modeled after the Gilly Doo. But to kind of make it well, I shouldn't say, but I think it's kind of funny that the Australian Special Forces, they have ghillie suits, but they don't call them ghillie suits. They call them yowie suits, which yowies in Australia are basically Bigfoot. It's a type of Bigfoot. And it all ties back to the Gilly Doo.
Wow.
And I've heard of people that set up or that have tried to set up Bigfoot hoaxes using a ghillie suit. So it's kind of funny.
Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and if you think about some of the reports of various Bigfoot where they're said to have like plants in their fur or like slimy moss matted in their fur. There was one in Texas called Old Mossback, which was 7 feet tall, hairy creature that was covered with moss and slime.
It was Man-Thing.
Yeah, exactly. Man-Thing and Bigfoot. They're the same thing. Now, I'm going to get a little crazy here with the fairy lore, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
We have talked on this show about mermaids way, way, way back. I think it was like within the first few episodes we talked about mermaids.
Yeah.
The current depiction of mermaids in the public eye are lower half as a fish, upper half beautiful person, just incredibly attractive person, and oftentimes rippling muscles, big tits, and a great singing voice. That's just how it goes. But that's not traditionally how they appeared. In fact, there's lots of myths and reports that show them as being more human-like, or I'm sorry, more ape-like than human-like on top. And which is funny because when you think of the Fiji mermaid,
right,
and how that was a fish tied to a monkey, but here we are with Mersquatch.
Right.
But there's precedent to this, and not so much with traditional mermaids, I guess, but there's precedent in that bodies of water are often seen in myths as being a place where spirits inhabit. There's a book called The Rebirth of Pan, which I want to track down so bad, but it's been out of print for decades, and it's like a gargillion dollars if you can ever find it online. But they're so rare, the copies of it. But this guy, Jim Brandon, wrote a book called The Rebirth of Pan. And it's kind of like him talking about the nature spirits and how they're tied with a lot of, I guess I'll say, paranormal or supernatural stuff, for lack of a better term. But in the book, he wrote about North American springs specifically, and how they were revered by the native tribes as being the seats of earth spirits. And he said, to the modern day, the list of all the places around the country where weird things happen at areas where there's these water courses, he would be able to fill an entire book with just catalog entries of these things.
Whoa.
So the idea that spirits inhabit water, that's kind of normal. But how does that tie into Bigfoots? Well, there are a lot of reports of strange, hairy humans being in the ocean where they shouldn't be. There was a witness in the 60s who sent a letter. The witness was a man named Robert Alley, and he had sent a letter to a Bigfoot researcher named John Green, where he described this weird encounter he had in Alaska in 1960. So he said he was going for he was outside by the on the dockside looking out over the ocean, and he looked up and he saw what he referred to as a human-like figure that was standing in the water halfway between the shore and the dock.
Standing in the water?
He was standing. He was just standing and staring at him. And he said he had arms like a man and a head like a man, but he was wet and he looked like his entire body was covered with this gray color. And he said he had round eyes. They weren't big. They were small and beady, but they were round. And at first he was kind of frozen and paralyzed by what he saw because it freaked him out so much. But then once he came to the realization of what he was seeing, he screamed and ran across the dock, tied up the boats, and then ran up the ladder towards the shack nearby, yelling for someone to come. So there were men up there who came running down with lights, and there were 30 of them that ended up coming out onto the dock, and they were shining their lights into the water, and they all witnessed this thing dive under the water, and it swam away. And they said with the lights on, they were able to see how it was swimming, and it swam underwater with its arms stretched straight out, but they weren't moving, like there's like Superman flying, but he was kicking its legs like a frog.
Ooh. And when was this?
This was 1960.
Jeez.
Yeah. But even weirder, so this was a report that was seen from a dock looking out into the water. But on May 9th, 1990, there were witnesses aboard an Alaskan fishing boat that saw a hairy hominid swimming in the ocean 1 mile from the shore. The crewman that first witnessed it, named Lindsay Bibbich, looked through the binoculars and so got a really good look at it. And he said the thing had hair that looked like hemp. So I'm imagining probably like dreads, something like that. And he said it actually looked like what he would think a Sasquatch would look like. And it had large eyes that he said were almost the size of baseballs. And the skin that he could see was like a muddy tan green color. And it had a flat face like an ape. He said there was no way that it was a shaggy sea lion. And then he said after watching it for a while, it went straight down into the water and it never reappeared.
Well, that's insane because you're describing adaptations for a Bigfoot being in the water with the skin color and the giant eyes.
Right.
God damn it. Aquatic ape theory was correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Then there's reports. There was a fisherman that reported throwing a fishing net into the Nooksack River in Washington. And when he went to retrieve it, a hairy man came out of the water and started pulling the net back into the water.
Whoa.
Yeah. Like, think of that. You're going fishing, all of a sudden this Bigfoot jumps out of the water and starts pulling on your fishing net. Give me that fishing net. And then this is the weirdest one of all. 1970. This was in the Gulf of Mexico off of Placidilla, Florida. 2 fishermen were 29 miles into the Gulf of Mexico, 29 miles from shore, when they see what they refer to as a skunk ape swimming.
And they call it a skunk ape?
Yeah, because the skunk ape is the Florida Bigfoot.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have the right type of boat to go out that far.
Yeah, but if it's not a physical being and it's some sort of earth spirit, then it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he's just like, yep, you're going to see me here too, bro.
And it's there. So I mentioned the current the current pop culture depiction of mermaids, but again, traditionally, that's not the way they looked. Like in Japan, they've got the ningyo, which was this simian creature that lived in the ocean. And then in Scotland, there was a legend of a being that had short curly hair that covered its body that was greenish gray in color. It had small eyes, a flat nose, and a big mouth, and extraordinarily long arms that lived in the water.
Huh.
But I mean, you take that description and put it on land, and that sounds like a fucking ape.
Yeah, completely.
But no, it's a fucking mermaid.
Wow.
There's even an account from the 13th century. There's a British monk who talked about this weird event where you remember the story of the green children that were captured and were raised as Christians.
Yeah.
This story kind of reminds me of that, but this monk, his name was Ralph of Coggeshall. He reported that these men that were fishing in the ocean caught a wild man in their nets, and he was naked, but he was covered with hair all over his body and had a long, shaggy beard. When they pulled him out, he eagerly ate whatever they gave to him, but if it was raw, he would squeeze it between his hands until juice squirted out. He would never talk. They tried to torture him to get him to talk, and even then he wouldn't. They brought him into church, but he showed no signs of reverence whatsoever. Every night he would go to his bed, and he would remain in bed until sunrise. The men that captured him brought him back to the sea, but he was guarded by 3 lines of nets, and he would dive under the nets and come up again, but he would voluntarily come back every time.
Huh.
But eventually he did escape, and once he finally escaped, he was never seen again.
Wow. Living with ape squatch, aqua ape.
Mersquatch.
Mersquatch, yeah. Mersquatch
Yeah.
and me.
Yeah. So Bigfoot not only is a fairy, Bigfoot is also a mermaid, but he's also a fairy. And he lives on land and sea. And pretty soon, you're going to find him on the moon.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff you're talking about, dude, it's just undisputable if you know about the other things you're talking about. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And so not only around water and these other hot spots, there's also sightings that seem to be around caves, which is entrances to the underground are traditionally where fairy encounters happen. So it's interesting that that all these different things where in myth and legend people have witnessed fairies, there's reports of Bigfoot, and there seem to be a lot around like stone quarries and mines.
Right. Yeah. That's true. We've noticed a lot of that in the stuff we've covered.
And that corresponds with different fairies. Like we've heard of the Tommyknockers, and kobolds and dwarves, and all those are beings that are thought to live in the underworld. But there's lots of reports of Bigfoot hanging out in caves. And you could just say, well, caves are a natural shelter, so that's where, and sure, but when you tie it in with the weird paranormal stuff, that kind of makes things a little bit different in my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's even ties to native folklore. The Yakima people of northwestern U.S. and I believe into Canada have this being that they called the wild stick shower, and it lives in the mountains and builds lodges underground, and the doors to their homes are said to be heavy and made from snow and earth, and they're impossible to find.
Oh, wow, yeah, and probably impossible to move when you do find them.
Yeah, but that corresponds with the fairy stuff. Like, you're not going to find an entrance to the fairy realm unless they want you to find it.
Right. How amazing. Yeah. There's a lot of correlation there. Way more than I would have figured you found.
There's even like the silly stuff that was corresponded to, or that was attributed to fairies back in the day. Like, there's this phenomenon that happens where horse manes are found braided or knotted overnight when no one has seen them. And it was always traditionally thought that it was fairies that did this. But there is now lore among the Bigfoot community of people experiencing this sort of thing. And strangely enough, it seems to happen on remote ranches, just like a lot of other paranormal activity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting that ties in as well. And then the traditional sounds that get lumped in with Bigfoot, like the whooping sounds. People have reported sounds of babies crying, wood knocking. In fairy lore, all that stuff exists.
Yeah.
But now we're attributing it to Bigfoot.
Hmm.
And there's one last story I want to tell that ties Bigfoot into fairy lore. And this is a story from the famous American hero, Davy motherfucking Crockett. Now, in fairy lore, there's a lot of stories, and even well-known fairy tales. There's a lot of stories of fairies being harbingers of doom and warning people of various ill-fated decisions or wrong paths, things like that. Well, Davy Crockett was also warned, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from a letter that he sent to his brother-in-law in 1835. And he relates this experience he had while he was bushwhacking in Texas. Whether it was the axe's disturbance or possibly the heat of the sun which caused an apparition to slowly form in front of my eyes, I know not. As a Christian man, I swear to you that what spirit came upon me was the shape and shade of a large ape man, the likes we might expect among the more bellicose and hostile Indian tribes in the territories. The shade formed into the most deformed and ugly countenance, covered in wild hair with small and needling eyes, large broken rows of teeth, and the height of 3 foundlings. I spit upon the ground the bread I was eating. The monster then addressed a warning to me. It told me to return from Texas, to flee this fort, and to abandon this lost cause. When I began to question this, the creature spread upon the wind like the morning steam that swirls off a frog pond.
Wait, what the hell's that?
It just disappeared, man. Just faded away.
Well, and talk to him.
Yeah, but that's like something from a fairy tale. It came to him, told him to leave Texas. He wrote his brother about it. Now, interestingly enough, Davy Crockett did not leave Texas, and he died 6 months later in defense of the Alamo against the Mexican army.
Should have listened to the smoke fairy.
Should have listened to the fairy. Fairyfoot.
Yeah, fairyfoot.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but I feel like I would just be repeating myself. At the end of the day, I'm not saying Bigfoot is a fairy or a poltergeist or an alien. What I'm saying is Bigfoot is all of those things, Mateo. Every last one of them are all the same thing, and none of them are what you would think they were individually. I think it's some sort of spiritual being. And I don't even want to say spiritual in the sense that it's, because I feel like you say it's a spiritual being, it kind of gives it some sort of like divine essence, which I don't think is present here. I think it's something that we don't understand fully. And so because we don't understand it, it would be ascribed as something supernatural or paranormal, which, I mean, to our senses and knowledge, that's exactly what it is. So that is why Bigfoot is a poltergeist and a fairy and an alien. And I know I haven't really talked about Bigfoot as an alien, but that's going to be the next Bigfoot is not Bigfoot episode I do. I'm going to take the Ancient Aliens approach and talk about Bigfoot being a UFO nut, and he rolls with the reptoids.
Ooh.
I don't know if he rolls with the reptoids. But for the sake of argument, he rolls with the reptoids, and he gets bossed around by the Greys.
Yep, rolls with Han Solo.
Yeah, he chills with Han Solo, and he's a space fairy.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.